All right, waiting to get started here on the live video. All right. Hey, y'all. I'm Task Force Bourbon. Welcome to the channel. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to be talking about wheated bourbons, or wheaters as they're known in the bourbon community. Where, as you can see before you, we have yet again another blind flight fight that's going to be lined out before us. But as is tradition, as is standard operating procedure, as it were, with Task Force Bourbon, we will be talking a lot about what wheaters are holistically, and then we're going to dive into each one of these, and why they were really chosen to represent the what I'll call the budget-friendly or semi-accessible wheated bourbons on the market right now. But before we do that, like I said, we're going to go ahead and kick off. But I do need to go ahead and throw out real quick the gentlemanranchers.com as a way of thanks for all of the information that I was able to essentially take from them and provide to you all. So check them out if you liked what you hear today, because a lot about what I'm going to talk about for wheated bourbons I'll be getting from those guys. But essentially, all bourbon is made from corn, with at least 51% corn to be exact, as required by the U.S. Tobacco and Alcohol Tax and Trade Bureau, the TTB. But the TTB is open to distillers filling out the remaining 49% of the mash bill with whatever cereal grains they like. All right, we've seen that a lot through a lot of different distillers, like Jim Beam using brown rice in their recent toast release. Their little book release is another example of that. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. However, most of those will include either rye or, in this case, wheat as a secondary flavoring grain. So traditionally, all bourbons contain a portion of malted barley, which contains powerful enzymes that allow the conversion of starch molecules in the grains to sugar the yeast can consume and turn into alcohol, a process called saccharification. Basically, that's the good part of the distillation and fermentation process, really, because that's what makes it alcohol. All right. So in every bourbon, the corn is the primary grain, like we talked about, making up at least half and often 3/4 of the mash bill, or list of grain ingredients. The rest of the mash bill consists of secondary grains. Since most bourbons contain malted barley, the remainder of the mash bill is called flavoring grain. The majority of bourbon brands use the spicy rye grain as the flavoring grain. We'll get into why that, historically it was, but we won't stop here to do that now. Except, of course, in wheated bourbons, right? There are some caveats. Some mash bills contain both rye and wheat, which imbues the resulting distillate a complex character. All right, that's known as a 4-grain bourbon, sweet and spicy with lots of depth. And some bourbons contain exotic grains, like we talked about. There really is no, limit to what they can include. Exotic grains include cereals like oats, sorghum, buckwheat, brown rice, quinoa, you name it. These grains are exotic to a bourbon, definitely not traditional by no means. However, wheat as a secondary flavoring grain has definitely become a traditional bourbon flavoring note. And obviously that includes rye as well. So barring some countries like Scotch where they outlaw, things like that, products like diazyme and Amlex are allowed in the U.S., giving distillers the option of bypassing the traditional use of malted barley. So, that's a little an aside, but that just goes to say that could be much greater than, what we're anticipating. However, what you see before you is maximum of like 20% wheat. So I'm trying to skip through to really the good parts here. Wheat is nearly impossible to malt effectively, and while its elasticity makes for great rolling dough, it also makes the distiller's life hell, leading to weirdly viscous mashes and gumming up the still. But its availability as a staple food source in most traditional whiskey-making societies meant that it was plentiful come harvest time should a distiller want to pitch a few handfuls in the mash. But in America, the frontier cultures of Maryland, western Pennsylvania, and Kentucky, where bourbon originated, traditionally favored rye as a food source because of its hardiness and resistance to blight. For these isolated settlers, a failed harvest could mean certain death. So they learned to adapt to the use of rye, hence its prominence as a traditional flavoring grain. However, as the bourbon industry matured, distillers looked to wheat grain in order to differentiate their flavors from other whiskeys. William LaRue Weller is often credited for creating one of the first wheated bourbon products in the mid-1800s. Again, more of that later. Most people would describe the flavor of wheat as soft and slightly sweet, It is associated with a more rounded mouthfeel as well as a mellow finish. Contrast this to the more commonly used rye grain, which is more often described as peppery and spicy. By swapping rye with wheat, the distiller can create a more approachable product. The sweetness of the corn plays well with the soft and mellow wheat grain to create and make a smooth bourbon that is excellent neat on the rocks, and it can be enjoyed by both aficionados and those new to the bourbon category, which you'll enter Maker's Mark as, for a lot of people, their first bourbon, right? That and probably Jim Beam. Just a quick aside, wheat whiskey is an entirely different category, although rarely utilized whiskey category under the United States Standards of Identity. Wheat whiskey is a product that is made from at least 51% wheat and matured in a new American charred oak barrel. The most widely available example of wheat whiskey might be Bernheim wheat whiskey from Heaven Hill. So you can't talk about wheated bourbon without talking, at least for half a second, about Pappy Van Winkle, right? The term cult classic doesn't even begin to do the brand justice. So the Van Winkle is now produced and managed with Buffalo Trace. It's an undisclosed mash bill. It does share that mash bill with Weller, but we speculate that it's somewhere around a 17% wheat content. So when we talk about Pappy, we're really talking about 3 bourbons. So for example, I'm only fortunate enough to have Van Winkle 12. This is not a Pappy. This is a Van Winkle brand, right? This is the last of the Van Winkle brand. Well, I guess it's a 13-year-old rye as well. But then you go up to 15, 20, and 23 year. That's the Pappy line. Those MSRP, you look at the 15 year at $120, the 20 year at $200, and the 23 year at $300. But really, you're talking anywhere between I've seen it upwards to $6,000 for a bottle. Outrageous. And really, that Pappy craze seems to have started in 1996 when a sales rep submitted the Van Winkle 20 year to the prestigious Beverage Testing Institute, where it got a 99, the highest rating it had ever been given at that time. Then factor in that they only produce around 84,000 bottles a year. This is exaggerated by the Angel share evaporating most of the product as it matures. For every 3 gallons of drinkable bourbon produced, 53 must be made. Quote, every now and again you'll see the word empty on a barrel, and that's just a gut punch, said Preston Van Winkle. But according to the interview with Julian III in Fortune magazine, this is, quote, strategy of scarcity intended to build their brand. When the Wall Street Journal asked him about the astronomical prices people were paying, he just replied, quote, if they're dumb enough to pay that much, that's their prerogative. Well, I definitely didn't pay secondary prices for my Van Winkle brand product, and I wouldn't suggest you pay $6,000 for a bottle of Pappy 23. With that being said, I have tasted all of their offerings, and they, for me at least, live up to the hype. I did a blind flight with 15, 20, 23. I found that 20 stood out just a marginal bit more than the 23, surprisingly. But really, you can thank that Pappy line for really bringing forth what we see now as the trend in the wheat side of the house for bourbons. And this is, again, what I'm calling an economy or a budget lineup, an accessible lineup for a blind flight fight. A premium lineup might look something like William LaRue Weller from the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection. One of those Pappies, whether it's the 15, 20, or 23. Old Fitzgerald, Bottle and Bond. This is a 16-year. It's a fantastic pour. That might make its way on the market for that premium lineup. You could also do something like the Larceny Barrel Proof. You'll note the difference. I'm all backwards in screen here. But you got like the regular Larceny, so the yellowish hue, cream-colored sticker on the front versus the black barrel proof. And then, you could maybe talk about, the Weller Full Proof or something along those lines, or maybe a Maker's Mark cask strength, because much like Pappy, nowadays you can't talk about wheated bourbon without talking about Pappy, Weller. Maker's Mark definitely deserves to be in that conversation. Larceny / Old Fitzgerald definitely deserves to be in that conversation. And then enter some of the craft guys. Bluegrass Distillers is one that comes to mind, producing a wheated bourbon. You also have Redemption, as being another Wyoming whiskey, as being another, you name it. Jim Beam's actually done one back in the day as well. Although this one, say I'm backwards, Maker's Mark technically is owned by the Beam Suntory company, which is part of the Jim Beam umbrella. But enough of that. We'll get into each one of these now individually. Real quick, just to surmise the wheat content of all. All right, we're going to move from least to most, and some of this is undisclosed and speculated, and some is disclosed, but we're just going to surmise them all. So sweet wheat from Barton, a Sazerac company, much like Buffalo Trace, right, is about 15% wheat. Moving over to the Weller, moving over here, Maker's Mark is 16, and then back to the Weller, 17, and then over to Larceny at 20%. And then now we'll go into each one of those, bourbons writ large. So I'll slide this guy over here, front and center, because we're going to be talking about him first. They're all chronologically spoken about for a certain purpose, right? Because it rolls chronologically best that way. But W.L. Weller is a wheated bourbon, obviously named after William LaRue Weller, a distiller who is credited as being first to use wheat as a secondary grain in bourbon as opposed to the more commonly used rye. Notably, William LaRue Weller hired the famous Julian Pappy Van Winkle. Pappy's history is long, but in 1935, he emerges in Weller's company to create the Stitzel-Weller Distilling Company. The Weller brand was created by the Stitzel-Weller Distilling Company and was sold several times after 1972. Since 1999, the brand has been owned by the Sazerac Company, owners of Buffalo Trace. In 2002, Pappy's grandson entered into a contract with Buffalo Trace and moved his inventory of barrels with him to where they became the first Buffalo Trace bottlings of Weller and Pappy. Eventually, that stock ran out, and Buffalo Trace's own wheated bourbon began to fill the bottles you see today. I have in the past done a Weller, 12-year versus the Van Winkle 12-year, and I found that there's a lot of similarities between the two. Essentially, they're the same, for me at least. And then the Van Winkle did come out on top. I would say a way to look at it maybe would be to look at like the Van Winkle lines as Weller, Van Winkle store pick, kind of in a way. Continuing on with Weller, though, after serving in the Louisville Brigade during the Mexican-American War, William LaRue Weller returned home to his native Kentucky. His family had helped him settle Kentucky in the late 18th century, and his grandfather, Daniel Weller, purchased a distillery in Nelson County in 1800. When Daniel Weller died, his estate was inventoried and was said to contain 3 whiskey barrels, 2 stills, 1 mash kettle, and numerous dry kegs. Upon his return to Kentucky following the war, William LaRue Weller joined the family business and began working at his grandfather's distillery. Weller had a sharp palate and a keen sense for business, and in 1849 he introduced the first bourbon ever that used wheat as a secondary grain instead of rye. Weller's bourbon was incredibly popular in antebellum America and ultimately forced him to place a green thumbprint on his invoices and barrels as a certificate of authenticity. Special Reserve is considered the most common of the lineup and is one of the 3 bottles that were at one time released on an ongoing basis and commonly seen on liquor store shelves. This includes, obviously, this guy, the Antique 107, which is the red label, Weller 12-year, which is the black label, and then they were joined by the less common William LaRue Weller, part of the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection, BTAC, and released annually each year. That's about just as hard to get your hands on it as Pappy. In December 2016, the 3 ongoing releases underwent a label redesign. And the lineup expanded in 2018 with the addition of CYPB, short for Craft Your Perfect Bourbon, and then again in 2019 with the addition of Weller Full Proof, and then most recently joined by Weller Single Barrel, an orange label. All right, so enough about him. Set him back here, get him lined back up in frame, and moving on, again chronologically, we have to take a pause, move this guy front and center, even though he's not in the lineup today, Old Fitzgerald, and really, it's really Old Fitzgerald Prime we're talking about, which looks nothing like this bottle here. But the Old Fitzgerald brand appeared in 1870 exclusively for passengers on steamships and railroads. Around 1900, Old Fitz was released to the American public and in Europe as well. During Prohibition, Old Fitz was one of a select few to distill under government supervision for the national medicinal trade. It was soon after acquired by Pappy Van Winkle for $10,000, who then introduced the Whisper of Wheat to the original recipe. Pappy produced it for years as a Stitzel-Weller distillery, though he refused to bottle at anything less than the domestic requirement of 100 proof, set up by the Bottle and Bond Act of 1897. He is noted in his advertising as saying it was silly for the consumer to be paying for water. If they wanted a lower proof, let them add water themselves. However, after his death, his son Julian Jr. reluctantly bowed to the pressure from the sales force that were clamoring for a lower proof version of Old Fitz, and Prime was created at 86 proof. Following the closure of Sitzeweller Distillery in 92, the facility was purchased by Diego and used for shortages of its I.W. Harper, Bullet, and Blade and Bow bourbons. The Sitzeweller brands were sold off, and Heaven Hill acquired several of them in 1999 that included Old Fitz. Heaven Hill now produces the bourbon reportedly using the same recipe as Sitzeweller did in years past. When Heaven Hill acquired the brand, they lowered the proof to 80 in Kentucky in order to stretch the supplies that they purchased. In steps this guy, the Bottle and Bond. It's an annual, or well, semi-annual, because we have one in spring and one in fall. Annotated by a green or a black label. The red label, as you see here, is a distillery only release. But in 99, when they released that, each release is aged no less than 8 years, because before 1958, 8 years was the maximum amount of time a bonded bourbon could be aged before the government called to collect taxes on the barrel. So Sitzeweller introduced an 8-year, very old Fitzgerald as their top shelf bourbon. Over the course of the last 5 to 6 years, Heaven Hill released in steps Larceny as their new flagship wheated label and pulled Old Fitz Prime back, and this is a premium offering from them. They also discontinued the affordable Bottle and Bond version, and in the last few years started to release a yearly luxury release of what we just saw before, the Bottle and Bond. Old Fitz has a mash bill of 68% corn, 20% wheat, and 12% malted barley. In many ways, Larceny acts as a brand extension for both the historic Old Fitzgerald brand. Parent company Heaven Hill makes them from the same mash bill. So now talking about Larceny. According to legend, John E. Fitzgerald founded a distillery along the banks of the Kentucky River shortly after the Civil War ended. Fitzgerald began distilling bourbon and selling it to passengers aboard the trains and steamships like we talked about. Shortly thereafter, he sold his brand like we talked about for 10 grand. Now in 99, Van Winkle revealed that Fitzgerald was not the man nor the distiller he claimed to be. He was in fact a bonded Treasury agent. At the time, the Treasury Department was tasked with collecting taxes levied on spirits, and as such, bonded Treasury agents were the only people legally allowed to carry the keys to barrel storage warehouses. Fitzgerald did have a discerning palate for fine bourbon and would use his warehouse keys to pilfer the best barrels of bourbon as they aged. The barrels, which became known as Fitzgerald barrels, and the brand were immortalized when Pappy named Old Fitzgerald bourbon after the Treasury agent and added a whisper of wheat to his bourbon recipe. Larceny carries on the tradition of Old Fitz by using wheat, like we talked about, and a secondary flavoring grain, using that same exact mash bill, except for in this case, it's bottled at 92 proof. The brand claims this is 25% more wheat than other wheated bourbons. So as we saw before, these are the standard basic offerings, this being 25% more, supposedly, than most of the brand offerings. That includes more than what you see on here on the table. But I'll slide him back over because we're done talking about Larceny. And moving on to Maker's Mark. So, Maker's Mark has been around since the late 1950s when Bill Samuels Sr. accidentally destroyed his family's 170-year-old bourbon recipe. With the loss of his family's legacy, he set out to recreate and improve upon the flavors that he had grown up and tame the sharp bite that some bourbons tend to trade on. When the son of Bill and Margie took over as president in 1975, his father's only words to Bill Samuels Jr. were, "Don't screw up the whiskey." All right, so unlike the cask strength version, which has batch numbers, this version is blended using significantly more barrels, estimated at less than 1,000 gallons, around 19 barrels. Legend has it that when William Bill Samuel Sr. was trying to come up with a mash bill for the bourbon, he had 7 options he was considering. Since bourbon takes years to age, he opted for making a loaf of bread with each of the 7 options, and the best tasting one is what became his whiskey. Maker's Mark has a mash bill of 70% corn, 16% soft red winter wheat, and 14% malted barley. These are, unique, cognac-inspired square-shaped bottles designed by Margie, the wife of Bill, and this red wax dipping can be associated to her. and her craftsmanship. They are all hand labeled, hand cut. They are all hand dipped, all of them. So even though this is a basic entry. Now this one you might know isn't your typical, vanilla yellow type labeling. It's got its own unique, what we call in the military, this would be ACU pattern. And this is a limited edition offering to celebrate the U.S. Army's 237th birthday. There's nothing different about what's inside, right? That's what's important for the blind flight. But the bottle itself, that's why you might be noting it's a little bit different. Sliding this guy back over here, line him up just right. Last but certainly not least, in step 1792 Sweet Wheat. Barton, which is owned by Sazerac, which is the same parent company as Buffalo Trace, is the oldest fully operating distillery in the famous self-proclaimed bourbon capital of the world, having begun operations in 1879. Barton 1792 pays homage to the year the Commonwealth of Kentucky joined the Union. There it is. Sweet Wheat Bourbon was the first of the limited release expressions from Barton 1792. A press release from them stated that by having a higher wheat content, they hoped to create a softer bourbon compared to the typical rye expressions. The standard 1792 expression is considered high rye, since it's thought to use more rye as a secondary grain than in traditional bourbon mash bills. The sweet wheat expression is rumored to have simply replaced wheat with their rye from their regular mash bill, making this likely a mix of 75% corn, 15% wheat, and 10% barley. There you have it, folks. We're done. We're now moving on to the best part of the evening. I'm going to slide over glass 1, glass 2. If you have these, please break them out. Let's do this together. Let me know what you think. If you had one, if you had more, if you thought something else, should have been in here that's not, let me know. But I got all 4. That actually kind of lined up pretty well. The goal of which, as like all my other blind flight fights, is not to get tasting notes, but to rather spend time figuring out which one deserves to come in first, second, third, and fourth. I'll do that starting left to right. I'll move one up each, sort of like a race car kind of thing, and they'll probably fight themselves back and forth a few times. But I'm going to remove these caps, put them off to the side, and start digging right in. Now, if I look down at the level here, to recap, this is 92 proof. Larceny is 92 proof. Makers is 90 proof. Sweet Wheat is 91.2 proof. And Weller Special Reserve is an even 90 proof. So they're all in that very low 90. What was 92? 2 is the highest. Is that what I said? 90. Yeah. So they're all relatively in the same proof level. So this would be an excellent blind flight fight. All right. Starting off with glass 1. More corn than I'm getting on wheat. But there's definitely some soft note there that's probably associated to that wheat. But I'm thinking corn. This one's got splashes of cherry in there. The corn does carry over from the opening. There's a bit of a tannic oak on the back end. I'm going to have to spend some time with all these, I'm sure, because these aren't, your most premium options where someone would just jump out and be like, oh, yes, the glass number X, Y, and Z is amazing. Slide that one forward, right? I think they're all kind of on an even keel. So I'm going to probably wait a minute to at least slide this to where I think it might fit. This one has got a much fruitier nose, glass 2. Less corn. Maybe some vanilla and stuff going on. Ooh, surprise, bourbon has vanilla notes. Ooh, this one is very floral. So I thought I was going to expect like a blast of fruit. Like this one has some cherry. Glass 1 has some cherry. Glass 2 has a much fruitier nose, but not a whole bunch on the palate, at least initially on first sip, but rather it has a little bit more of like floral, a floral experience. So far, I like glass 2 easily over glass 1. There it is on the back end, a blast of corn and wheat. Like almost like I feel like I'm outside. It's cold. My body's still warm, and I can see my breath. Like that's like the whisper of wheat. It's almost comical to say that, but I can feel that there almost. So moving on to glass 3. So this nose. Sorry, it's gonna clear my throat. Back to sort of, I think maybe. No, this is much sweeter and cherry. This one's more complex and maybe more oaky. This is a blast of wheat. There's some tannic oak on the background. Shoot. A lot of sweetness. I know one of these is named Sweet Wheat for a reason. So far, I think I'm going to slide that just a smidge behind glass 2 for now, but that could go back and forth. All right, and then the final glass, at least on the first go round. This one has more of that caramel corn. Not so much. None of these really stood out in terms of the wheat aroma. Oh, I'm digging this one. So this one, it's more caramelly. You know, like I said, I wasn't about getting tasting notes. So when I say, oh, it's smooth, oh, it has vanilla, or caramel, and oak, please don't beat me up. I know, like, those are all things a bourbon are probably going to have. I'm just trying to broadly capture, you know, in my mind, savor it there so I can slide them where they fit. But while it's probably the most well-balanced, maybe, it's kind of one-dimensional. I'm going to tie it with glass 3 and glass 4 for now. Take a quick rinse. So if there's a way, I don't know how, but I'm not seeing any comments as they pop up, unfortunately. But leave them, and I'll be sure to get back to you after the video. But I'd love to hear your feedback on what you thought, or who you think's gonna win. Mark it now. Maybe there'd be a prize for the winner. I take that back. Glass 1 is definitely the most balanced, but it's so thin. It feels like it's lower than 90 proof, because obviously the lowest here is 90. Maybe I'm going to slide him up. Jeez Louise, this is so tough. This one just feels like, what's the highest proof? 92? Glass 2 tastes like it is, you could have convinced me over 100. You probably could have convinced me like 107 stretching it, but something shy of 107, but above 100. I think you could have convinced me. This one tastes more complex than, you know, the highest we got on Untitled was 92, lowest is 90. So it definitely tastes more complex than a 92. Very corny though, like a sweet candy corn or something. Maybe some maple syrup, perhaps. A little nutty. Glass 3 does share a commonality with 1 in the sense that it had a smidge of that cherry. And I don't know what it is about wheated bourbons, but I do find, for me, a lot of my wheated bourbons do have a cherry note on them. In fact, Makers is something I usually stick out with. Now that's Makers because it has tastes like cherries, but I couldn't tell you what's what. And I drink Weller Special Reserve like it's going out of style, and Larceny also like it's going out of style. These two to a lesser degree. Maybe back in the day I drank a lot of Makers, but the 1792 Sweet Wheat definitely I've only had a few times. Oh, so I am getting a little bit on the comments here. So let's go back real quick. Dude, where did your beard go? Sorry, y'all. New year, new me. Just getting started a little late. So the 1792, I guess I don't know where it's at. Somebody's asking how that is. Cody Holland, we'll know at the end of this. We'll figure that out. So Dewey Augustin thinks the 1792 is going to win. Wow. I got a Joseph Tuitt as well saying the same. Surprising, because you know what? Like, when I rated these, the 1792 Sweet Wheat was my least favorite of all these. I think I had an opportunity to buy one. This is like very not common for me where I'm at. And this 1792 Sweet Wheat was not something that I found on a shelf. And when I had the opportunity, because I had tasted it prior, I passed right by it. So it's going to be a heck of an upset if when we flip these cards over, it's number one. But that's what's fun about these blind flights. Giving that some time to sit. I'm really liking that cherry. It's a really balanced. I don't know which one I said is tannic now. I feel like I'm gonna fake it till I make it now. But I like what's going on in glass 3. I think it's tied with 2. But glass 4 has got some honeys and some really rich caramels and things going on in it that I'm really loving. But you know what? Like, this is a wheated flight. And which one tastes most like wheat? Glass 4 has a lot of that. It almost comes across, I keep saying like candy corn and things. They're very approachable, very soft, mellow. I can almost like rub the top of my roof of my mouth and think like I'm almost feeling like something grainy. And I think glass 4 is providing some of those notes. And when I think of like wheat, the secondary flavoring grain as opposed to like rye, I think of something that is more grainy than rye. In actuality, I don't know if that's actually the case. But that's how I feel about it. So feel it. So I've got to start limiting these things, and I'm gonna go and limit 1 now. There's a tannic note on the end that I'm gonna have to just go ahead and decide. I'll give it 1 last sip at the end, but right now I've got to go ahead and place it where it's at because I've got to start limiting this thing, or we're gonna be here all night. Glass 1 has got something tannic on the end that I'm not in love with. Very sweet, very corny, very well balanced. Nothing I've tasted here is awful. The complexity on 2 tastes like a foolproof bourbon or something almost. I just got those, but not a lot of wheat. So I'm pulling glass 3 behind glass 2. But I think glass 4 is coming up surpassing glass 3. And it is. I think glass 4 is surpassing glass 3. So I think this is the final lineup. I'm going to give myself a second, give myself a rinse. But right now, as it stands, let me slide these in order. Right now, from last to best so far, it's glass 1, then glass 3, then glass 4, then glass 2, as that order. But give myself a second to calm down. I'm starting to get that warmth from the bourbon in the mouth. That's numbing things just a bit. Now I could probably get out tasting notes if I wanted to, but I really want to give them all a fair shake. So I want to let my palate calm down a minute here. You could take something like a unsalted cracker and mix that into the lineup here and completely cleanse, but it's maybe a little overkill. Water works just fine. So set that there. I feel pretty refreshed. So I think the best strategy going forward is, because glass 4 is as contentious as it was, I'm going to go glass 4 versus glass 1 to deserve what's most important: who wins. Because everybody else is great to know where they rack and stack, but we need to know who wins. So let's fight glass 2 and glass 4 against one another, starting with glass 4. Caramel, wood, a little honeyed. It's a nice pour. Definitely could tell. I think that one I can tell is a liter. I'm going to slide this up. Golly. Because you know what? Like the glass 2, it's too in your face. And when I talk about a wheater, the whole idea of a wheater bourbon is that it's approachable, that it's soft, and I want to taste that whisper of wheat. And so that's why you don't see things typically like this Larceny Barrel Proof, which works just well. This is 122.4. Oh my goodness, right? For a wheated bourbon, or you got your Weller Full Proof coming at 114. But they work, but I like them as they are. But those individuals lose that whisper of wheat all day. Now, what can come out of those flavor notes, that how all the other things work together, the age in the barrel, all that good stuff, somehow works really well in terms of the flavor that it imparts. However, major comma, that for me at least, that whisper of wheat is gone. The high proof of a wheat is gone. And like I said, there's a lot of great flavor notes that aren't found on other bourbons from those higher proof wheat bourbons. You lose the essence of what a wheated bourbon is, and that's why I like wheated bourbons that are somewhere around the 90 to 100 range. Very sweet, very corny. There's a little bit of caramel and some, yeah. I almost want to beat, like, these two are tied right now. Let's not fake each other out. Glass 2 and glass 4 are tied. I feel like I'm gonna regret saying it, but I think glass 4 is gonna surpass glass 2 just marginally, because I'm liking what the wheat that comes out versus the strength of what's on the number 2. Even though I like the flavors on 2 better. Or shoot, maybe I should just. Man, this is a tough fight. I think I like the balance of glass 4 better. I'm just going to call it. Like, I'm going to say glass 4 is better than glass 2. Though that's number 1 and number 2 spot. I'm going to leave it at that. Because I really love what's going on in glass too. I really do. But I want that whisper of wheat. Um, and I like a more balanced approach on a wheated bourbon. If I was just a regular bourbon flight, I think glass 2 would win. But it's not. It's the wheated flight. So number 3, number 4 spot. Let's go ahead and take some comments here while my palate calms down a little bit. Benny says, I use sparkling water as a palate cleanser, works very well for me. That is a fantastic observation, and that I've done that as well. That works amazing. I just don't have any available for me right now. That definitely, the aggravation that the carbonation provides to your palate really helps. It's almost like you're scrubbing your palate. So completely concur. Obviously, you're not talking a flavored, sparkling water, but a flat, non-flavored, well, not flat, but a carbonated, sparkling, non-flavored water definitely serves to cleanse that palate really well. Joseph Tewitt says, what a great way to catch a buzz. I'm jealous. Well, my friend, if you're ever in my area, let me know and come on through and catch yourself a flight. But again, if you guess what's going to be the number 1, you might find yourself in the running for a free sample coming your way. Dewey Augustin says, is it wrong that I use beer? Yes, quite frankly, it is. Although I definitely condone the drinking of a good beer when it calls for it. This is not that occasion. Glass 4 is the only one that made you go wow in the first round. Did it? I'm really glad that I'm reading these comments now because that makes me feel so much better about Glass 4. I was so contentious about 2 and 4, but we have to finalize this. Glass 1 and Glass 3 need to find themselves a number 3 and a number 4 spot, and I've got to go ahead and figure out where they fit in. So one last time, let's go ahead and fight 1 to 3 for number 3 and 4 spot. It tastes not. I'm not going to talk smack because I don't want to eat my words later, but it's a little tannic on the end compared to what's going on here. This one has that grainy feel. I really hope that if I go back and look, this is the one I've been talking about, the graininess. But it works because I'm here for a weeder, so I think I feel comfortable. Here it is, the finale. We're here. Y'all made it. All 4 live watchers, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully there's more when we replay this and I post it and people tune in. So share it with your friends, obviously. But I'm calling it right now. So from worst to best, it goes Glass 1, Glass 3, Glass 2, Glass 4. I'm surprised I can still count to 4 after all the bourbon I've drank here. But we're going to go ahead and turn the cards. So Glass 4 is... Oh my God. It's Weller Special Reserve, you guys. Holy camole. That is an absolute upset. I was a staunch supporter of Weller Special Reserve. Although I got to say, I'm really pulling for my dog Larceny because, and I'm probably going to eat my words again, but Larceny is like, really grew my love for weeders. It really did. So no matter if it's this guy or not, Larceny holds a special near and dear place in my heart. Glass 3 is 1792 Sweet Wheat, which I'm not surprised. I'm surprised I didn't take number 4 because I was not in love with it, but yeah, it did beat Weller Special. And I think if I'm sitting here talking about it now, I can see why it did beat it because this is a more balanced, although simplistic pour as compared to this. This one has that graininess, but I don't get that sweetness. Yeah, so to name yourself something sweet wheat with 20% wheat, or no, was 15% wheat. Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. Because the Larceny is what had 20% wheat. So we had 15. Let me scroll back up because my thoughts are all mixed mashed. But here they are. So the suite we had 15. The Makers had 16. The Larceny or the Weller had 17. The Larceny had 20. So it's down to Larceny and Makers, Mark. Glass 3. This is probably the Larceny because the fuller proof. It's 92 proof versus the 90 proof. This one I tasted the high proof. I've talked about it. I think this is a Larceny, but it's the Larceny. It's the Larceny, you guys. Oh my god. Oh my god. It's the Maker's Mark. The Maker's Mark 1. I gotta show you. The Maker's Mark 1. The Maker's Mark 1. Maker's Mark. This has got to be a different edition. The ACU pattern. No. 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 This is why we do blind flights. I have no words. Sorry for that. I almost lost my cool there for a second. Well, I challenge y'all. Please find these 4 bourbons. Do a blind flight fight. Be honest. Really spend some time with it. If you have a review channel, make your viewers watch. But, man, oh man. Maker's Mark 1. Close second behind Larceny. You saw me go back and forth. I'm done here. I give up. No, but seriously, you guys, this is exactly why we do Larceny, this this is exactly why we do blind flight fights. And I would highly recommend you do the same. So, if you enjoyed what you're watching, stay tuned in because I'm going to do more. But until then, I say cheers. I'm going to pour something really special here, and maybe you'll watch a review of it live later. But until then. Cheers to the winner in the room, Makers. Damn it.